Eric, thank you very, very much. I'm Brad Popovich. I'm the Chief Scientific Officer at Genome BC. And Eric, thank you for a wonderful tour de force of your views and the NHGRI's views on where genetics has been, genomics has been, and where it's going. So with that, I'm going to open it up to questions and just facilitate the question and answers. So please ask you, if you have a question, please come up to the microphone, and I'll ask you to just introduce yourself. But Eric, maybe what I'm going to do is just start with the first question, if you don't mind. One of the things that you
get the second question.
One of the things that you said was we're going to need thousands, hundreds of thousands of genomes to be able to start tackling complex disease and common disease. One of the things you didn't talk too much about is what is it going to take to give this crowd, this community of people, the comfort to participate in that and allow their genomes to be sequenced and put out there for public consumption, if you will, in the scientific community.
So to be clear, I think ultimately all these studies together are hundreds of thousands of genomes. For any given disorder, we're probably talking thousands to tens of thousands. We need to do several things. We need to make sure people appreciate that they can be part of a common good, that this requires a community of willing participants if we're going to advance human health for humanity, so that they should feel part of that. We need to give them the assurance that they will be protected. In the United States, that's why we passed a bill called the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, Genome, which is a step, at least in the United States, to protect people from genetic discrimination, so that they would feel empowered to participate in studies without feeling that information about their genomes could be used against them for insurance and or other means of discrimination. So meanwhile, I think it's important for them to recognize that we're not talking about taking this genomic data and making it available to anybody. When I say it's available to the scientific enterprise, we put this in databases that only scientists who get registered and appropriately approved by the research institution get access to that data. But you have to have faith that the scientific enterprise will take care of that. And so we need to do that. And so, I think this is a partnership, and increasingly we hopefully will convince patients that this is what's needed, and that they can be part of a pretty extraordinary change in how we practice medicine.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Thank you. My name is Sean Grant. I'm a cardiologist here in Vancouver. When you consider the for-profit organizations that have emerged as a result of the $1,000 genome and improvements in technology, and then you consider from a public health perspective, do you think those organizations are partners in delivery of effective health care in the future, or are they a problem in the delivery of effective health care?
Without naming names, I guess I'm curious, when you say these, or you talk about companies?
Yeah, companies like 23andMe,
yeah.
or something like that.
So the question, which is a very good one, just to generalize it for folks who may not sort of be aware of some of these things, is that there are companies that have established themselves to use these technologies along the lines of what I described, that give us clues about where variants might reside in the human genome that might infer risk for human disease, and provide the ability at very reasonable costs to test people as consumers without any health professional being involved. This was known as direct-to-consumer genetic testing, DTC testing. And it's also being done here and now. Long before we even know what all the implications of these variants, while many of us still regard this as a research enterprise, they're providing this. And on the one hand, this has created alarm for some people because you don't have a healthcare professional involved and it has to be interpreted. I'm a pathologist by training. The whole reason I have my field is to help even physicians interpret data that they're going to then tell your patients. Now we have nobody involved. It's direct to consumer. So on the one hand, people have become alarmed about that. On the other hand, it's actually interesting to relate to the previous question. It has at least shown, at least in the United States, an incredible curiosity of some members of the general public in learning about genetics, learning about genomics, sort of feeling empowered to learn about their genome and how and many of them are willing to have that company use their data for doing other studies and learning. And it sort of created a dialogue and in some ways has elevated the discussion level. And so it is a bit of a two-edged sword. And I've seen sort of, there's positive aspects and then there's concerning aspects of it. I mean, I'm not overly alarmed. I'm actually trying to figure out how to interact with groups like that and see. I think with time, as our knowledge closes, and by the way, U.S., it's a free country. I mean, it's what people want to do. Really, you can't fight it, and it's not necessarily anything I think I would want to see overly regulated. And so I'm trying to see where there might be some positive virtues of this, and in some ways may see how we might be able to partner with the kinds of things that they have utilized in this new world of social media and crowdsourcing and all these phrases, and how that might be harnessed in a new way of doing research, which might play into your first question, getting people more participatory in biomedical research.
Diane Feingold, President and CEO of the Michael Smith Foundation. Fabulous lecture, and I really get the impact and the importance of much of this work, particularly around single gene diseases. And as the step parent of a child who's got a rare genetic disease which was just discovered at age 30 that could have, had it been newborn screened, prevented her a life of, with brain damage, it would have been fantastic. So really impressive stuff. But I actually come out of the complex disease, diabetes realm, obesity realm, and I need you to help me fill my empty glass with the hope that this actually is going to have an impact in that area. In fact, I'm quite pessimistic because you slipped between complicated and complex, but they are actually very different things. There's a distinction between complicated, where you actually can work out all the sequence of information that's actually going to lead you down the line, and complex, where there's so many interdependencies between things that working out all those relationships actually isn't going to solve the problem. And with many common complex diseases, we already know a fair amount that we're not doing anything about that could actually save us a whole hell of a lot of money.
Non-genetic information is what.
Yeah, non-genetic, absolutely. Phenotypic information. My mother was obese. I know, same problem, right? So we ignore information that's in front of us in this seeking of all this added information, which I still struggle to figure out how it's going to be useful to us down the line.
So it's a great question, and it actually interrelates with the previous question, because what the 23andMe does is to try to get information to make some predictions for people for complex diseases. So let me clarify something that I probably wasn't clear enough in my talk. I don't want to lead people to believe that I think genomic information will be a predominant tool for telling people what complex diseases they're going to get or not get. I think the greatest value, and the only value that I would say I'm pretty confident about, is in thinking about, as we figure out those lollipop regions and figure out where the variants are, what the variants are, and find that the 38 most important variants for hypertension is probably more than that. I'm not going to lead by saying that's going to be really important for the patient sitting in front of me in a diagnostic way. I'm interested in using information about those variants to figure out, when the human genome has those variants, what genes are affected and what pathways are affected, and does that tell me something new about hypertension? It certainly told us something new about age-related macular degeneration. You may know that story. We've now going to a clinical trial, dealt with a pathway that nobody ever thought was involved in eye disease. And so I'm interested in what's going to happen for possible new therapeutic developments and what it teaches us about the disease. I think that's going to be the earliest impact. Whether it ever gets us to a point that says, all right, you've got 24 out of these 38, you're more prone to obesity, watch what you eat. I'm not sure, I never claimed, and I didn't mean to imply, that that's what that's going to be useful for. Whereas, in contrast, I actually think for these, and it sounds like for your family member, that for rare genetic diseases, actually getting genome sequence might instantly tell us things we really do want to know. So I actually see there's a distinction. And I would also say there's a huge distinction between genome sequencing an individual and talking about a bunch of complex diseases they may or may not get, and genome sequencing a tumor specimen, because I think the tumor specimens are going to be the lowest hanging fruit out there. Yes?
Hi, my name's Erin. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at Simon Fraser University. I'm just wondering how quick you think the general population that isn't necessarily scientifically literate is going to be to embrace this new technology. And how much do you think they're really going to latch on to this personalized medicine?
That's a great question, and it'll be extremely heterogeneous. The fact that some are willing to, immediately spit in a tube and mail it to 23andMe's, there are some that are absolutely are into this. There are some that are already bringing to their doctor's offices information about themselves from some of these companies. So there's, and then at the other extreme, there's individuals where the scientific literacy is so low that we can't even imagine they're really understanding genetics and genomics. And so what that uptake, what that uptake looks like, I'm not totally sure. And it'll be highly variable, like everything else in medicine and everything else about how people do preventative means to take care of their health. I think a lot of it's going to be heavily dependent upon the disease we're talking about. A rare, devastating disease or a disease like cancer is much more immediate in your face, and I think people tend to use that more as teachable moments. And the more vague things like you're a little hypertensive, you're a little diabetic, you're a little overweight, you're a little this, you're a little that, it might be harder. We have huge issues, especially in the United States, around just scientific literacy. I don't mean to paint a picture this is going to be simple, when you deal with genomic literacy. Yes?
Yeah, it was a great presentation. I don't think I've ever heard a better one in my life. I've heard a lot of them, so thank you for that. I'm just wondering where we are in that project of collecting the hundreds of thousands of individual genomes. And I have a suggestion. People of my age group, I'm basically retired. I'm not looking for a job. I'm not looking for insurance. I've got nothing to lose, so I would be, there's nothing preventing me from giving my genome for any sort of project. Is there anything ongoing right now? Any program out there somewhere where people just volunteer to hand in a sample?
So they're actually, it's actually very interesting. I will tell you, you're welcome to go look at this. I'm not endorsing this project. I'd like to, as a scientist, it relates to this issue of how open do people want to be. And there's a spectrum of people's interest in this. So for example, there's a project that George Church, who's a prominent member of the community at Harvard, runs called the Personal Genomes Project, where he is enlisting individuals who are willing to have their genome sequenced and make it publicly available, not just available to scientists, but publicly available. His attitude, and the people that sort of agree with him, just think that the only way to get past these concerns is just create a culture where everybody realizes everything's available. It's just a open Facebook world kind of a thing. And it'll be interesting how this plays out. And you may want to do some Googling, find that site, and see if you want to participate in that project. You actually, part of the consent process is you actually have to take a quiz to make sure you really know what you're doing, which is actually a good idea. They ask you some scientific questions, and that's part of the criteria. But that's at one extreme. At the other, there are many other studies. I don't know what's going on here, but there may be studies where they are interested in accruing individuals either with a particular health condition you may have, or maybe you have no health condition, you'd just be a normal control. So the question that you asked, or you partially asked about, well, where are these 100,000 people? The number I'm throwing out is just that recently, just at the NIH, just at one, it's a major biomedical research funder, we did an inventory of grants that have been given out for the next 4 or 5 years. How many genomes likely will get sequenced based on those grants? And the number was about 80,000. And that was done a year ago, and the number was 70,000. Probably a year later, I'm sure the number is over 100,000. That's just NIH. If you start adding up Canada and then the UK and China and various other major genomic places, I'm sure that number is going to get closer to 200,000, and the costs keep going down. So we're dealing with numbers in the hundreds of thousands, I'm quite sure, in the next 5-10 years.
And I'll just follow up and add that it would be worthwhile to look at a site, BC Generations project, which is a BC equivalent of kind of similar to, it's a little bit dissimilar to George Church's project, but similar in the sense that they're collecting longitudinal data, including genomic data on patients in BC.
And for example, a study that I give the UK tremendous credit, I'm jealous. I wish and I wanted the United States to do this. The United Kingdom just recently completed accrual of a program called the UK Biobank. And if you're interested to read about it, you'll find lots to read about. And where they got 500,000 members or citizens in the UK to sign up for a longitudinal study. They consent, those genomes will inevitably be sequenced eventually. And these are individuals who are going to be followed for many years. They collect some baseline information, health information. They're going to be routinely going back to them. And they found these, people were willing to do this, and they signed appropriate consents, and they'll protect them as best they can, and hopefully that will all go well. And now that's a beautiful study, because then you have sort of a group that you can follow. You get a lot of disease information, a lot of phenotypic information, and a lot of genomic information. Yes?
Hi, I'm Laura Thaw, I'm his wife.
Really? Do you want to sequence your genome too?
Well,
You might be able to get a two for a price.
and you know what? He and I are really different, like
Really?
you said.
How long have you been
The
married?
guy next to you,
How long have
really,
you
really
been married?
different. Pardon?
How many years have you been married?
30.
30. Oh, congratulations. 30
Yeah,
years.
as he puts it, 3 years of marital bliss. Okay. My question is actually, we're just here for interest. We're not professionals in the business. My question is a simple one. When you had your lollipop diagram up, I noticed the little lonely X chromosome didn't have any lollipops. The Y did a few. I assume that's something like BRCA1 and 2 things or whatever. But why is it? I mean, there are certainly male...
So wait, I didn't, what's your PhD in? I missed what that was very astute that you picked that up. But maybe you're
Well, I
preoccupied
do
by
have
the
a
sex
science degree,
chromosome.
but it was in 1966.
I see.
Things have changed a lot. I'm
You
just a
actually
movie
picked up-
extra now.
You actually picked up a very astute observation, and it's actually usually only the geekiest of computer scientists pick up that observation in one of my talks. So I congratulate you. It's not to say that the X chromosome, which I know is near and dear to your heart since you have 2 of them, it's not to say that there are not imperfections on the X chromosome and there are variants that can occur. It actually turns out that for a long time, most of that data was generated with analysis methods that were all set up to deal with 2 copies of every chromosome. And they just didn't bother. There's a lot of complexities when you have men and women running around in these studies, and some of them have 2 X's and 1. And so they just sort of ignored those chromosomes for most of the studies. So most of these successful genome-wide association studies sort of said, forget the sex chromosomes, we're just going to worry about the autosomes, chromosomes 1, 2, 23. So we actually just recently funded some groups to go back and look through that data with a better algorithm that dealt with sex chromosomes, and there'll be plenty of things they'll find on the X chromosome, but it was a very astute observation. Yes?
Hi, I'm Marjorie Robbins, Techmera. I'm just wondering, in terms of the implementation that you were talking about, how can we go from having a small group of genetic counselors and then bridging all this data for our overworked physicians? I know as a scientist, I'm helping my friends interpret their medical issues. The physicians are overwhelmed, and I'm wondering if you have a vision for how we can bridge this gap and how scientists can help.
And you're asking this in Canada with a reasonably functional healthcare delivery system. You're not talking about the United States, which is about as dysfunctional as one could imagine. And so, great question. So I'll give you a few answers. First, I don't have the answer. So I don't have the definitive answer. It's a huge problem. Number 2, you're absolutely right, it's not just the physicians. If we leave this and I can say this as a physician with all due respect, we leave this in the hand of physicians, we're going to lose big time. So we are just as much reaching out and thinking about educational programs and outreach programs to pharmacists and to nurse practitioners and physicians' assistants and genetic counselors. And how this information gets delivered and who's delivering it is going to have to be a distributed healthcare professionals circumstance, not just physicians. And the reason I use the cartoon of the person with the iPad is whatever we do, it's got to look something like that. And even if it's a genetic, we've got to have it be somebody who's curating this information and giving their best professional judgment. We need to have professional society saying, yes, this variant means this, and we need to have that in a readily accessible lookup form, so with your 15-minute encounter with a patient, you're going to be able to give something definitive, or you'll give them some resource to look up, to look more, to learn more about it. So how are we trying to get there? We are literally now just putting out a granting program to start as a pilot to imagine how can we get this huge amount of information about variants and the hundreds and hundreds of papers, but start to develop a curation system that allows expert opinions to sort of say, this variant means this one means this one we don't know, this one means this clinical thing, and to start to look, to build that infrastructure. And it's not going to be easy, but we absolutely have to invest, and we're going to invest to try to start developing that.
Okay, are you envisioning a new type of professional who could mediate?
I think it's a great issue. It goes back to what I said. I'm completely convinced that it will, whether it's a whole new professional or just a combination of skills. But you are absolutely right that, and again, all trainees here, listen. I mean, we need to have the next generation sort of facile with in a multidisciplinary way, because they're going to have to be able to speak a lot of different languages.
Thanks.
Yes,
I
Nuri.
thought I'd ask a question.
Sure. No, you're allowed.
My question is, where do you see going from the aspect of personalized medicine in terms of a specific treatment because of a certain genetic change in that individual and or potentially preventative? Where do you see going from there, if at all, to larger changes in society in terms of evidence of certain diets leading to certain mutations in potential cancers, or environments, communities, where there's certain industries? Where do you see changes that can happen to leading to disease as a result of the environment, and actually something happening in policy changes and these kind of things?
So devoid of my talk, if you notice, is much of a discussion about environmental contributions to disease. And it's not out of disrespect to environmental contributions to disease. It's just I don't have much expertise about environmental contributions. And importantly, the reason I'm up here talking about genomics is because the technology has driven us to the point where we now can study the genome in a very effective way. And that part of the equation is sort of surged ahead. What we need are better and better technologies to study the environment so we can really understand the interplay of the environment and the genome. So that's that kind of. You raise some issues about, as we then dissect and fully appreciate sort of the genetic contributions to disease and the environmental contributions to disease, how, what will be the societal changes? Giving as an example, would there be restrictions on certain exposures that are? That's a great question. I'm not sure I have a crisp answer. We don't really need to be too, we will deal with, we have enough issues with global warming and people's acceptance. We have issues around pollution that we know is bad for, so I think these feed into much larger societal issues. The question is, if we have more definitive data that clearly shows us, what will that look like? Will that change policymaker? I don't know. I'd love to be optimistic, as I usually am, and say, oh, absolutely, but, I'm a little embarrassed what's going on in global warming, where in the face of clear evidence, there's a lot of people that want to bury their head in the sand. As a member of the federal government in the United States, I'm not exactly proud of what we're doing right now in that area. So.
Hi, I'm Judy Bishop. I'm a member of the media, so I have to complain on that right away.
So my best friends are members of the media.
That's right. You bring a degree of clarity that's exceptional, and so you should take that away with you. And you probably know it, because you're very comfortable speaking. It's so great to see. What I'd like you to do...
Now you're going to ask me a really hard question.
No. I'm going to ask you to do something for all of us. As a member of the media, I love to make things clear, and you have done that here. Every one of us is probably going to carry away something we'll talk to others about. So do a small exercise for us, if you could. If you're speaking to someone who knows very little about this field, how do you summarize where the state of the Human Genome Project is and what it means to most people? Tell us that so we can take that away and talk about it too.
And I didn't do that?
You did, but I'm talking a lot less words.
Or maybe less words.
The cocktail party elevator pitch, and I say that because all of us are going to go away and talk about this. And equip us, if you could, with a little something.
So I often, and I tell people, my employees, my trainees over there, you really need an elevator. You have 30 seconds to do it. So I'm putting me on the spot. I'm all nervous. And it's fine until right now. What I typically say is on all lines of, the Human Genome Project delivered us the first insights about our genetic blueprint. I will often use a metaphor like, blueprint. And I say we now have it in front of us, And now we're in a phase where we now can look at each of our individual blueprints and see the imperfections in it that they give us risk for getting diseases. And that is setting up a circumstance both by which we can understand the basis for that disease and then figure out maybe how to better diagnose it and maybe how to better treat it. That's sort of about the 30-second version. Then I have a minute-and-a-half version. So I often will gravitate to a metaphor. And I find blueprint to be one that seems to work a lot, but there are other ones that you could use as well. So.
My name's Hal Weinberg, son of Fraser. I was wondering if you thought about the future in terms of what this blueprint might be used for the purposes of other things than just medicine.
Yeah.
For example, is this blueprint possible for determining the capabilities of individuals with respect to different kinds of behaviors, learning different things, musicians as distinct from mathematicians, for example? And is the future one in which this is going to determine the nature of education and the nature of the way in which the society is going to utilize the information for determining the capability of different individuals to contribute to that society?
So it's a great question. We probably could talk about this for 5 hours. I know people have other things to do tonight, so I'll only do 4 hours. No, it's a great question. I would also point out I didn't really talk much about a very unique feature of the field of genomics in that from the beginning of the Genome Project, certainly our institute, but on our funding agency, but even went on in Canada as well, as you've gotten involved in genomics, is to dedicate some of the funds to researching the ethical, legal, and social implications of what's going on. In fact, we have a whole program at our place called ELSI, Ethical, Legal, Social Implications Research. And it is a very wide-ranging research program that looks at many things, including some of the things. What does all this really mean for our view of humanity and for a view of individuality and so forth? Among the things that gets looked at is, how are people going to use this information? I try to stress medical applications. That's the good edge of a two-edged sword. One could start to get concerned about other aspects of will people try to study and figure out genetic basis of behavior? Will that then give excuses for people being genetically predisposed to certain behaviors, and therefore you say it's not a consequence that they have to deal with? One example you didn't give, which I often talk about, I'm in an Olympic city, I know that, and so when the Olympics even this summer came out, you can't help but recognize the fact that part of what you're seeing in elite athletes is genetic variation. Some of this is known. In fact, increasingly we are learning both in animals and in humans genetic variants that absolutely give those are some of the smiley faces of variants that give an attribute of being a better long distance runner or a better sprinter or whatever. And we will increasingly uncover this. And will that change the dynamic of the Olympics or other athletic? And these are all things we have to grapple with. And I don't have a crisp answer. Some of these things make people feel much more nervous about how we're going to go there. And some of this we probably will find that societally we don't want to go there. And other things we're going to have to figure out when we learn these things, what we do with that information. And we all, at the same time, we should recognize that we should react by thinking about these things carefully, doing research to understand them, not just going on reactions. We need to sort of understand better what people are thinking and have a research foundation to making decisions, but also recognize that there's some awful, powerfully good things that can come of this. And we need to do everything we can as a society not to let sort of bad uses of the same powerful tools become a detriment to the greater good.
So we knew this was going to happen. We knew this was going to be a lively discussion. I'm afraid I'm going to have to restrict it to one more question. But then the good news is we have a reception that's going to be out in the corridors, and you're going to be able to ask Eric whatever you'd like over some food and cocktails. So one more question, please.
Hi there. My name is Isla Thompson. I'm a first-year genetic counseling student.
Excellent.
Don't
worry about a job. You got one.
Well, that's what I'm wondering about. So the job market right now is really tough. There's only 6 of us in our program because there's not enough jobs for when we graduate. And
really?
We're encouraged to advocate for ourselves once we graduate. And I wonder, based on your talk, how you think we should approach creating new jobs for ourselves and new
Yeah,
opportunities.
come to the United States. Are you serious? I mean, actually, you really catch me by surprise. You're not in over-demand in Canada for genetic counselors? Really?
No.
Okay, so I'm serious, come to the United States. No, advocate for yourself. I think there are some insightful members of funding agencies here. If they are not building multidisciplinary teams to pursue genomics, and now thinking that there's going to be a role for genetic counselors, somebody's missing the boat here. I don't get that. I just can't imagine. I just know that genetic counselors are in high demand in the United States, both for research endeavors, but also for clinical applications. I mean, the future is going to be, this is a part of, a team of individuals, whether it's healthcare delivery or whether it's clinical research, that are incredibly important. I mean, our institute, we have a genetic counseling training program. We invest in this regularly. And I wish we could provide more money. We should train more people because they're in huge demand in the United States. So maybe you're just in the wrong country.
So everybody, please just join me in thanking Eric. And Eric, please take it. So it's now just before we have the reception, it's my pleasure to reintroduce Alan Winter, our President and CEO of Genome BC, and Alan Pellman, who is our Chairman of the Board of Directors of Genome BC. Please come up. Yes, please.
Okay.
I didn't know that. I actually have words here. It's my pleasure, certainly after this talk and after the discussion and my task, I guess, is to thank you and to present you a little token of our appreciation, but you have to wait.
I don't know.
Okay. Oh, you don't get that yet. Apparently I have other things to do too. Alan Winter and Brad Popovich, who was here before, they're really the brains, if you like, behind bringing these lectures together. As Alan said earlier on, this is the third Don Rick's distinguished keynote address. They've all been wonderful, as almost as high energy as today. But certainly they've all been great, and I know today was one of those too. So Alan and Brad, thank you for bringing this all together. There's also, again, that's the high level work. The real work was done by Sally Greenwood, who was almost up here.
It was a pattern.
Yeah, it was a pattern, yes. And who's the Vice President of Communications at Genome BC, and her team. She includes Sheila Driscoll, Julia White, Cease Nokata, Jenny Boom, and Damien Lee. Great job today, really brought this all together. It's a wonderful audience. The questions were terrific. The answers were very interesting, except for that last one. But we can live with that. So again, thank you very much for bringing this all together. Okay, now your turn. I took a couple things away from your, I'll call it a presentation. It was called a lecture before, I guess it was, but to me it was a presentation. Extremely high energy. You definitely live in your world, and you're able to share it and communicate with others extremely well. I come from the non-health side, but even with that sort of background, and as you know, at Genome BC, we deal with everything. A large part of it obviously is health, but we have a lot of other sectors that we're involved with too. And one of them I come from on the forestry side, but I can tell you make a really great pitch for the importance of health, which obviously is there, but for the fact that you use the term low-hanging fruit is there, and maybe easier for many people to see from the health side than it might be to see whether it's mining or forestry or fishery or wine or some of the other sectors that we get involved with. Still important, but maybe not quite so easy to put your finger on. And you certainly make a tremendous case for that, and thank you for that. The other comment I would make here in this small country, with our 5 genetic counselors, We struggled also for a long time with what we call big science. And you mentioned some of those earlier on. That's been tough for us to really get our heads around that and how to deal with it. We certainly see that big data, as you call it, this computational challenge that comes along with this tremendous amount of information or sort of data that we have, and the challenge to turn it into information is just huge. And hopefully we will be able to deal with that challenge somewhat better than we deal with big science. We still do it, we're still very active in it, but we're such a small player. I think this is one area where we have an opportunity to take some sort of leadership role. So that was it. Now, with all of that, I really do thank you for not only braving the storm, finding a way to get here and persevering with that. We owe you thanks for that by itself. I wasn't deeply involved with it, but I did hear about some of the other contingency plans that we had just in case, and they would not have been anything like this. So thank you for that. The token of our appreciation that we have, I don't know if you can hear me, might look like a walking stick, but it really is a talking stick. I think meld very well with the types of presentations and the energy that you bring to it. There's a lot of history behind these, so I'm sure that we have some of that information, but we hope you like that. That really wraps up the formal part of the presentation. As you've heard, and I'm sure you're waiting for, there is the reception now, an opportunity to mix, to exchange not only with Eric, but with others in the crowd here. There are some refreshments. There's some nibbles, I believe, also. So again, thank you, all of you, for being such a tremendous audience. Thank you for coming. Thank you for joining us. And hopefully you will enjoy the reception. Please take advantage of it.
Applied for a couple jobs at your place. Oh, wow, I'm not sure I know that, but anyway, I'm wondering if you would have...
Oh, as close as possible. What's oh, yeah,